Hey everybody, welcome to another mini Adam Gibbs adventure. Isn't this spectacular? This is the root system of a western red cedar. And if you're wondering where I am today, I'm actually in an area called Cathedral Grove. Now, Cathedral Grove is on Vancouver Island, and it's a little park not far actually from Little Qualicum Falls, which I've done a couple of videos of now, maybe 10-15 minutes up the highway. This is a very touristy area. It's not too bad today because it's quite gloomy and threatening to rain. The reason why it's touristy is it's right on the highway that goes out towards the west coast of Vancouver Island, which is also very touristy. Tofino especially for surfing, and also Ucluelet. And not far from here there's also a town called Port Alberni, which I was at the other day actually photographing Wiener Falls, which I'll leave a link up here too. So a lot of these areas that I've been photographing recently are all very close together, not far from Parksville. Now, truth be told, this is actually my second day out here. The reason being is that yesterday I was out here, the light was really nice, but a lot of my images actually turned out quite blurry. And the reason being is that for whatever reason, I'd accidentally switched on the vibration reduction on one of my lenses. And of course, when you use that on a tripod, it's not good. So, bit of a rookie mistake there, but you know, it happens. So I'm out here today to try and retake some of those images. If you notice that some light in my images is quite nice and then other it's very dark, then you'll know why. It's two separate days mixed together. All right, I'm going to wander around, take my images, and take a little bit more video footage to go with this video. All right. Okay, since I started off the video sitting in this root system, the longer I look at it, the neater it gets. It's actually really cool. Old growth forests like Douglas fir, cedar, a lot of those trees have pretty shallow root systems. They spread out a long way, and of course in windstorms they blow down quite easily. But this is really, really neat. So I'm going to see if I can get some shots of it with an ultra wide angle, so 14 to 24, and then I'm going to back off and get some with my 24 to 120. And I kind of want to show you the difference between the two lenses. Now, the great thing about wide angle lenses is that you can really pull the viewer into the scene. You can get really close, but get everything in sharp focus from foreground to background within reason. Now, the only issue with wide angle lenses, especially the ultra wide angles, is that because the angle of view is so wide, they cover a huge area. There's a lot in the frame to think about: foreground, midground, background, and generally speaking, you know, you don't want things on the edges poking in that are going to be distracting for the viewer to look in the central part of the image. So in that respect, they are quite hard to use. It's funny, this is kind of a little bit off subject, but when I was photographing gardens, the magazine used to get quite a few letters into the editor complaining that all we ever covered were very large gardens, and that wasn't true at all. What was happening was I would be faced with photographing a very tiny little garden. And of course, the only way to photograph that garden would be with an ultra-wide lens. Now, because an ultra-wide lens really exaggerates the space between everything, it made that tiny little garden look huge. lenses have a specific effect on your photograph. So it's important to know what those effects are. So with this image, I can really emphasize the foreground, the root system, but something that I have to be really careful of is the background. Now the sun pokes out now and then, and generally speaking, I don't like white spots in my sky because it's somewhat distracting. But when you're using a wide angle and you're taking a scene like this, it's really hard to avoid that. So you have to try and compose it in such a way that you're not going to get any distractions on the outside of the frame. That's the challenge. So I'll take a shot here with a 14 to 24, and then I'll back up and take one with a 24 to 120, and we'll kind of compare the two. All right. Okay, now here's the first image that I took at 14 millimeters, and you'll notice that I got lucky. The sun came up very briefly there, so I composed the scene in such a way to include a bit of the sun there, so I'm getting a bit of a sun star, so that helps the scene quite a bit. You'll also notice though that because it's such a wide angle of view, it was unavoidable, but I ended up having to include some of that bright sky in the background. And rather than try to just darken it up, I've actually brightened it up. Now, what I really wanted to kind of demonstrate here is the effect that this lens has on the relationship between the background and the foreground. You'll notice that the background trees are quite far back, and the lines in the foreground created by this dead stump here have really been dramatized by how wide the lens is. Now, if we go to the next image, this is with the 24 to 120, and this is taken at 62 millimeters. You'll notice that the background all of a sudden has been brought forward, and the foreground isn't quite as dramatic looking. And the reason being is that we've compressed the scene, and of course the further back I go and the longer the lens, the more compressed it'll become. So this is a great way to kind of bring a background forward, as where a wide angle lens is a great way to distance yourself from the background and emphasize that foreground. Both images definitely have merit. It's just a different way of photographing the same scene. Okay, now I absolutely love the graphic nature of these roots here. They just kind of come sweeping down off this western red cedar here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really try and emphasize those roots by getting in close with a super wide angle lens, in this case a 14 to 24, and I've racked it right out to 14 millimeters. The only problem with doing that is you'll notice that you'll be able to see a lot more in the background than perhaps you want to show in your final photograph. So I'm going to take a shot with a 14 millimeter, and you can kind of see the results of that. And then I'll take another shot with the focal length that I would probably want to use as a compromise to not only emphasize the foreground, but also eliminate some of that background clutter. And then I'm going to take another shot backing off with the 24 to 120, just to kind of give you a comparison of what happens to the foreground in relationship with the background. This is just a beautiful tree. Okay, now here's the first shot that I took of the roots of the cedar, and this is at 14 millimeters. Now I haven't processed these images, I just wanted to show you the direct raw files just so you can kind of see what I'm working with here. And you'll notice that the 14 millimeter has really separated the foreground from the background, and it's exaggerated those roots, and it's an excellent way to really emphasize foreground. The problem is, like I said, because you're including so much and it's such a wide angle of view, all of a sudden you have a lot of things in the background that you might not necessarily want in your picture. In this case, we have a lot of bright areas, and then we have part of the path on the right side. So even though it's emphasized the foreground, there's a lot of other things in there that I don't necessarily want in my picture. They're just too distracting. Now on the other side of the spectrum, here's another image. This is unprocessed as well. This is again at 62 millimeters, and you'll notice now that the telephoto lens has really compressed the scene, so it's almost de-emphasized that root in the foreground. Now I had to kind of crop it a little bit because I didn't really want to include the path there, but I think it gives you a really good idea of what a telephoto lens will do. If you want to de-emphasize anything that's kind of distracting in your foreground or really dominant, then this is one way to do that. Here is the composition that I settled for that I like the most. It's kind of a compromise where I've really emphasized that root, but also at the same time I've tried to compose it in such a way so there's nothing really distracting in the background. The background and the foreground kind of meld into one half-decent composition. And then finally, here is the image processed. I've decided to really brighten up that curved root to really emphasize it, and then darken the background, because really that's not the important part of the photograph to me. The most dominant and interesting part is that kind of twisty root. So there we have it, different ways to photograph the same subject. I just wanted to show you what kind of effect lenses have on the same scene and how you can control that look by just using different focal lengths. Okay, now I've been searching around and I think I might have found a pretty nice scene for a pano. Now I think it would probably look better in the fall because there's a lot of big leaf maple leaves kind of on the ground here, but of course they're all brown and not very interesting this time of year. And the ferns are looking a little bit squashed. So if it works out, it might be a good place to come back later on. So I'm going to start off at this tree here, and then I'm going to go right across these fallen trees here, all the way over to here. I kind of like it. I mean, it's a little chaotic, but I like it because it's got some nice big Douglas fir in there, but it's also got these big old trees that have been blown down, and it kind of tells a bit of a story. It's a bit chaotic, but at the same time there is somewhat a bit of order to it, so I'm sure I can make it work. As you can see, the highway is is right here, so it's not exactly a wilderness experience, but yeah, I quite like this. So I've leveled out my tripod, and I'm probably going to take it's probably going to take about six or so images, and then I'll probably have to crop it a little bit in Lightroom. I like using Lightroom to form panos. Anyway, it looks quite good. We'll see how it turns out. My crazy weather I'm having here. 1 minute it's sunny, and now it's snowing. Just weird. Anyway, I think I'm done for the day. I really hope that you got something out of this video. I just wanted to give you some food for thought on different focal lengths and what those focal lengths do to the landscape. So as always, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give me a thumbs up, and if you wouldn't mind sharing this video if you enjoyed it, that would be awesome. Alright, thanks ever so much again, and I will see you later. Alright, thanks.